few months ago, I bought some new black fingerless gloves. A couple of them. Just thought it'd be nice to have some spares. This pair I've not worn before. Literally put them on a minute before we started filming, and I found out that this glove only has a thumb and 3 fingers. Hello? Speaking of complete fuck-ups, we're going to be talking about the management at Deck 9. Lot of shit going on there. In fact, they deserve the bird flipped at them.
The term virtue signalling first reached wider cultural significance, for want of a less complimentary term, around about 2014, when the emerging pupil alt-right glommed onto it as their buzz term du jour. Now, because people who scream woke at everything are dummies who are so bad at words they don't even know what a singular they is, virtue signalling was, like SJW before it, and indeed woke years later, was liberally misapplied to pretty much anything that fascists might not like. Most relevantly, the label of virtue signalling was slapped onto pretty much any statement, the majority of which were genuine statements about inclusivity and human rights from left-leaning people who actually believed in the values of what they were saying. That's another thing misusers of these words don't understand. As they don't have values, they base their opinions on what triggers the libs. Of course they're not going to be able to separate good faith arguments from bad faith ones. Oh, and if any such folks don't like what I'm saying, please remember it's just my opinion, and free speech means I can say what I like about you without consequence. That's how it works according to y'all anyway, so I'm in the clear. Anyway, the point of all this baiting is to say that, in the wake of the toxicity exposed at Life is Strange developer Deck 9, we have a real example of what virtue signalling actually looks like. Virtue signalling is not simply stating one's beliefs, but doing so in a loudly broadcast and, crucially, insincere manner, all for the purposes of clout, kudos, publicity, and other ulterior rewards. The point is, a virtue signaler either doesn't really believe what they're saying, or is tastelessly gilding their own righteousness. Either way, the point is the disingenuous nature. It's the difference between, say, a trans person saying trans rights and Bethesda saying trans rights. One is a person advocating for themselves. The other would have some fucking audacity after how it treated a trans employee. As with most things small-time pundits and tiny indie studios are regularly accused of, the actual perpetrators are found in the corporate space. Executive interests dictate what gets censored in the media, executive interests sanitize their products to appeal to as many markets as possible, and executive interests employ virtue signalling all the livelong day, pretending to have values for the sake of marketing. I mean, we have this discussion every time Pride rolls around, and corporations suddenly care about gay rights and have rainbow profile pics for exactly 30 days. There's a disturbing number of organizations whose public commitments to diversity and inclusion are little more than a shield for the prejudice they encourage behind closed doors. In fact, much of the virtue signalling performed by these companies are a sick joke when you see how they treat the people they're hiding behind. Life is Strange Studio Deck 9 is an incredibly diverse organisation, and we know this because Life is Strange Studio Deck 9 will tell you how diverse it is. At length. And with utter desperation. The desperation comes from leadership, which has been accused of permitting a culture of abuse, harassment, toxic attitudes, terrible management, and Nazi shit. So basically, another game company has been revealed to be another game company. Do you get it? I'm saying it's fucking standard for studios and publishers to be rife with abuse, harassment, toxic attitudes, terrible management, and Nazi shit. Because they are, and it continues to be disgusting. But honestly, one of the grimmest things about IGN's blistering expose is how routine the details are. Horribly, depressingly routine. In the past, I've done a lot of episodes about industry abuse, something I've had to scale back dramatically in recent years because the constant stream of dreadful stories got too bleak for the audience and myself. If you've watched any number of those installments, you'll recognise so many of the details, some of which I'll highlight for all our displeasure. According to the report, Deck 9 management would let issues such as bullying, sexual harassment, transphobia, and similar shitty behaviour run rampant for months on end, preferring to ignore or condone it. Same thing, really. Despite crowing about how its writing team is the most diverse, writers were especially alienated, abused, and treated with general hostility. Almost as if just having marginalised people on a team isn't enough, especially if you're going to ignore, mistreat, and generally act like a cunt towards them. And despite the obvious sarcasm, I still feel a need to make it crystal fucking clear. It isn't enough. One senior programmer was considered particularly obnoxious, harassing and directing aggression at female members of staff. Management's brilliant solution to the problem was simply to move the man's desk further away from his victims. There are no words, except maybe one. Verungereist. Another perpetrator has been identified by name, Chief Creative Officer Zach Garris. And you know what? I'm actually going to let him have the floor first, because frankly I think it's as damning as any allegation. Here's how he chose to respond to accusations of abuse. In all my career, I have never worked with writers who were as creatively inflexible, antagonistic toward difference, or less inclined to listen or compromise as a select few of this group. Furthermore, he chose to reverse the allegations, claiming of some writers their conduct became unprofessional, more antagonistic, and accusatory toward me of the toxicity that, from the perspective of many people in the studio, was in actuality a result of their behaviour. At this time, it's important to note that Garris initially quit Deck 9 with a bunch of official complaints about his conduct, and when he later returned to the company, multiple team members elected to hand in their resignations rather than work under him. I think once people have decided not associating with you is better than being employed, it might be time to consider the possibility that you're the problem. Oh, and if you employ transparent Darvo tactics on your accusers, you're gonna look sus as fuck to anybody who has personal experience with abusers. Anyway, that's what he had to say for himself, so... Among Garris's alleged actions, reprimanding staff for asking why a trans character was cut, writing off concerns over problematic content as getting too hung up on political ideologies, and generally overseeing a pattern of bigotry and mistreatment. He's said to have especially lashed out at those pushing for better representation in games. Gosh, it's almost as if people who whine about political ideologies all the time are politically motivated to do so and are just dishonest about it. Fuck. Speaking of which, the Nazi shit I mentioned earlier, by the way, is not colloquial. Deck 9's management ignored months of complaints that Nazi shit was being surreptitiously added to an in-development Life is Strange game. Fascist memes, quotes, and imagery were left included as assets for months, and when the company finally bothered to look into it, they shrugged the thing off as unintentional. Pretty sure a few doctors tried that excuse too, when they were dragged back from Argentina. The screwed up thing is, if you asked a normal person to name a series that was friendly to a diverse crowd, or if you asked a fucking chud to name a quintessential SJW game, both would be hard-pressed to come up with a better example than Life is Strange. A series praised for its representation, it's an especial favourite in the queer community, which makes the bigotry at Deck 9 all the more gross. The company has enjoyed positive publicity off the back of its inclusivity for years, and while the many writers and devs on the ground may genuinely believe in that inclusivity, it's clear that leadership was merely signalling its virtue and holding values pretty much opposed to those it broadcast. For an example of how Deck 9's management disingenuously uses diversity as a shield, you need look no further than the company's own fucking response to the allegations. Reading their statement, I was in utter disbelief. I mean... Right. At Deck 9, telling diverse and deeply human stories is part of our DNA, and it's every creative individual at the studio who helps make them compelling, relatable, and meaningful for our dedicated community. We are a small, diverse, and incredibly talented team, which is reflected in the rich characters and intimate storylines of the games we make. Our hiring and promotion practices prioritize a diverse culture and workforce because of the experiences we are creating and because it's the right thing to do. We are proud to be a studio that employs a diverse team that goes above and beyond industry norms. Yeah. Did you spot the tell? Apparently, whoever wrote that statement thinks repeating the word diverse makes allegations of prejudice just go away. How is this not a parody? This is about as literal as you can get to paying lip service to the notion of diversity. This is what virtue signaling looks like. Faced with allegations of bigotry, harassment and bullying, all the company can think to do is repeat how diverse it is. No actual addressing of the situation, no plans to do better, no substance or apology, or basic acknowledgement of those affected. On the contrary, Deck 9's statement is practically a self-published fan letter. It takes nerves of erectile tissue to literally extol your virtues with preening self-congratulation the way they did here. But you see what I mean, right? That is virtue signalling. Not just thinking we should improve society somewhat, not believing the world could do more than pander exclusively to cishet white guys. Virtue signaling is hiring marginalized people and then ignoring them, thinking having their name in the credits is representation enough. It's opening your game with a statement about how multicultural the team is while failing to note that team had to suffer under bigoted leadership. It's publicly co-opting social movements and inactively supporting human rights while overworking, harming and alienating those over which you have all the power. I tell you what, right? It sure as fuck ain't hiring diversity consultants either. In fact, doing so is generally quite antithetical to virtue signalling. You'll notice that a lot of that virtue signalling applies to the two most notorious and karma-dodging abusers in the game industry, Ubisoft and Activision Blizzard. Both publishers have had their games decried as SJW propaganda by morons who bought them anyway. Both boast about how diverse their teams are and both hide behind that diversity when their malicious company cultures are exposed. To the people they've injured, such marketing ploys are truly fucking insulting. These companies don't even do the bare minimum, and they want a fucking trophy. All these organizations, Deck 9 included, have promised anti-harassment and or hate speech policies that never materialized. All of them have ignored and actively hurt the diverse teams they satisfied themselves by hiring. And it's not fucking enough. It's the employment equivalent of I can't be racist to have a black friend. It doesn't matter how diverse your teams are if they all report to the same men overruling their ideas and thinking they know better that they always have, perpetually shutting out the lived experiences of others with a glass ceiling. This is said to have been a major problem with Deck 9, and it demonstrates perfectly how diversity on its own doesn't fix the inherent systemic problems that necessitate diversity in the first place. The staff demographics may have changed over time, but management hasn't, so the culture never changes. All the men who oversaw the abuses at the companies I've mentioned got to keep their jobs and all their power without having to answer for their parts in any of it. For all that's come to light, nothing has actually changed. This is what virtue signalling looks like. But you know, allow the artists to put danger hair on one character and we're even Steven, right? Obviously, anybody can be disingenuous about their beliefs for some self-serving motive. It's not just restricted to corporations, and it's not like Deck 9 is a huge multi-billion-dollar corp like Activision Blizzard or Ubisoft. You know, I've used corporate and management interchangeably, but one of the only unlaughable things they said in their statement was that they were small. In any case, the disproportionate attribution of the term to people who express sincerely held views for the view's own sake ain't, as they say, it. Not that it matters to the people bandying the term about, whether it's SJW, woke, cultural Marxism, or critical race theory, it all means one thing regardless of etymology. They're just interchangeable names for anything that scares them, which turns out is most things. As for the game industry, it continues to reveal itself as a fucking cesspit, and I'm as sickened with it as ever. It's a good reminder though that words and actions are very different, and a corporation's default position is avaricious cynicism with a depraved drive to exploit the shit out of anything it can get away with exploiting. As we've seen, this exploitation extends to the belief that every human being deserves respect. To the average publisher, that belief in decency is just another thing to repurpose to their advantage, something to win favour and trust while they shamelessly betray the whole idea. Just remember that management doesn't mean a thing it says. If they're loudly telling you how virtuous they are, take a look around and see if you can spot where they've buried the vice.
So anyway, Square Enix, oh yes, they're involved as well. Of course there's a big corporation whose toxicity from the alleged bullies at Square Enix London bled into teams at Deck 9. Apparently there was a lot of hostility towards the inclusion of diverse characters and the publication of those characters' diversity. Square Enix didn't want, for example, developers to talk about a character's bisexuality. Sorry, this is all alleged. So yeah, they didn't want the bisexuality to be publicised until there was positive press response. There is also an alleged instance of Square Enix being concerned about releasing the gay game. I know I can do that with my 3-fingered glove. Anyway, just another reminder that the game industry is trash, it's rotten to the core, it doesn't matter the size of the company, there's something deeply wrong with the culture. So, you know, I reiterate what I said many years ago. Investigate every company, every developer, every publisher. And thank God for me. And the 3. Look at